Welcome to Layers of Communication with your host, Lydia Taggart. Life presents experiences that add a layer to who we are and how we see the world, affecting how we communicate. Lydia is here to help you take apart the layers and create new ways to connect and build relationships. So now, please welcome the host of Layers of Communication, Lydia Taggart.
Hello, everyone. It's Lydia Taggart here. I'm super excited to have you here today. We have so much awesome stuff to do. I'm so excited today. I'm going to share a little bit about what's been happening in my world a little bit, and then I'm going to introduce all of you to Kellie, our guest today. I'm super excited to have her. So there are some things that make us a little different, right? Maybe you have one leg shorter than the other, or maybe you know someone who's missing an arm. Maybe it's not that obvious. Maybe you just have a bunch of kids. Maybe you've got quadruplets. You know, sometimes we're different, but we don't necessarily feel different all the time. We feel like just normal people, right? And we just are fun to be different. So this morning, first, I got to tell you, I'm Lydia Taggart. This is Layers of Communication. I'm really excited to share these things with you as our experiences of life layer onto who we are and how we interact with people based on how we see through those layers. And it affects our communication. So that's what we're doing here today. How do we change the way we look through our layers? And do we have to change it? Maybe we don't even have to change it. So this morning, this morning, my kids are late to school, and that's kind of a thing we have to deal with, right? So I was like, okay, we're going to dance and sing and get moving, and we've got to go, right? My daughter's like, yes, we're going to sing and dance. Yay, Fun Mom's here. Woohoo! And we have this lesson, like, this is not how you hold your pretend microphone. You got to totally rock it out and hold it like a rock star. And my daughter's just, yeah. And my son comes over, he's like, Mom, that's a carrot. Do we really have to sing and dance? That's not a microphone. It's a carrot. And so we have these different perspectives, right? And you have to have fun, or it's not going to be, why not have fun? So I've got a couple boys. They're like, oh, Mom's going to make us sing and dance. And my daughter's like, woo, rockin'. And I said, you have to sing and dance. I have all my other reasons that they don't understand. But first of all, you're moving. You're getting your energy going. And I have all these different reasons why we need to sing and dance. And so my one boy's like, all right, I'm dancing. That's all I'm going to do. And then I still have one boy who's like, oh, man, I'm not going to sing. I'm not going to do it. Nope, I'm just going to sit here. Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be tying my shoe. Oh. And so we come to a point where there's an ultimatum. You must sing and dance, or I'm going to follow you through the school and sing and dance while you're going to class. And that one boy, he's seriously considering, I can see him thinking, can I run fast enough to get away from Mom? Is this really going to be an issue and a problem? Can I run fast enough? And I see he's thinking, Mom knows my teacher. My teacher's friends with my mom. Worst case scenario, my teacher will make me sing and dance in front of the whole class because she's that kind of friend with my mom. All right, I'll sing and dance. And so then he's like, yeah, I'm singing, I'm dancing. And my daughter's like, wow, dancing, it's got my carrot up, and I'm singing. And we get to school and everything's great. But I share this story because I think there's some value in this, other than it's super fun to sing and dance. And I'm excited for our play shop, our parents' play shop. The next one, this one's all not available this week. We're having parents' play shop, but the next one's going to be August 11th. Come and have fun ways to play with your kids and just play. Super fun. But this perspective of, yeah, I'm awesome, and who cares who's looking at me, I'm singing and dancing, versus Mom's going to embarrass me. How fast can I run away? And do we get along with everybody well enough that it's going to be a thing? And I remember several years ago when our quads were walking, we could all hold hands. And I don't know why, but I was crazy enough. We went to the grocery store several times, like every time we needed groceries, when they were big enough to not fall out of the basket. We walked and we held hands, and my middle child, Dallas, he has a skin condition, and it was pretty bad. And so we would put socks on his hands so he couldn't scratch and things couldn't get into him. We wrap him up in saran wrap and stuff. And anyway, we got to the store this one day, and he's like, I'm not going in. I'm not going to do it. People are going to look at me. And we had this whole discussion. He's like maybe 4 or 5 years old. He's a pretty little guy. I think he was maybe 3 or 4, actually. Anyway, we decided, you know what? They're not looking at you. They're looking at everybody else. We are quite a scene going into the store. And he is able to deal with that and have an okay time going grocery shopping after that. And we've got pictures of him with his socks on his hands and everything. But are they really looking at us? Or are they looking at somebody else? And why? Why would they be looking at us? Is it because they're inspired by us, or they're like weirded out by us? There's all sorts of reasons why different people get weird looks. And it's not necessarily because they think you're weird. But Dallas now has a friend who, and this is the one thing I love about Kellie, her book that she's written really relates to this. Dallas has a friend whose first language was sign language because both of his parents are deaf. And I was one of those guilty people going, what? That's so weird, and maybe not weird, but how do they do that? How do they have a kid who can hear, but neither one of them can hear? How does that happen? How do you function in that kind of life? And I think every one of us has something that is different to an extent that we all are looked at in a weird way. How can you function in that role that you've taken on? And so I'd like to introduce you to Kellie and tell you about her. Her bio does not give her enough amazing stuff. She's super, super amazing. Her bio is just simple, but she is completely amazing. So Kellie Fitzgerald has always been known that she was different from an ability to see energy and communicate with spirit as a small child to feeling the emotions of those around her without them saying a thing. As a result, she has taken the scenic route through life. She famously says of herself in her numerous workshops, I did not have an idyllic childhood. This led to my not having an idyllic first marriage, which led directly to my experiencing a number of illnesses and other negative events. Today, she's an award-winning author, publisher, entrepreneur, Reiki master, and intuitive who helps others to find their purpose and joy in their own lives. And Kellie, Miss Wonderful Kellie, has also written a fabulous book. I'm wondering why I can't hear you. Welcome, Kellie. I'm excited for you to share with us about your is it Laehli? Is that how you say it?
Uh-huh. Yep, it's Laehli and the Elephant.
Oh, probably because I didn't plug myself in. That happens.
That might be the reason.
Okay. Are you there?
All better?
Oh, I still can't hear you. Oh, there you are. Okay, there you are.
Yay! Don't you love technology?
Well, the funniest thing is probably everybody else could hear you, but I just couldn't hear you.
That's always nice.
Yeah, so tell us about your book and your project, the Laehli and the Elephant. Is that what it's called?
Actually, it's back here. There it is. It shows up backwards on the screen. But this is book 1. It was inspired by my grandson, who is deaf. You were talking a little bit about how can 2 people who are deaf have a child that can hear. And most deaf children are born into hearing families. So the people
I know,
sort
that's
of
just
have
so
it in
silly.
reverse.
And logically, of course, why couldn't they? But that's the first thing that popped into my head was, how does that work?
Right. Yeah. And in about 40% of deaf children, they really can't pinpoint an exact reason for their inability to hear. It's just sort of a mystery with many kids, 40% roughly. But it's a breakdown. Some of it is genetic, and some of it is a disease aspect, and some of it is an injury aspect. But in 40%, they will never figure out why this child is deaf. And to me, with my grandson, it was enlightening because I had never given much thought to it. I've known deaf people throughout my life, and I've always been able to communicate with them, and I never gave much thought to how did they view the world, not being able to hear, until my grandson was diagnosed as being deaf. And then all of a sudden it was like, I enjoy drinking coffee in the morning outside on the porch listening to the birds. He will never have that experience. How different is that? But he's very visual. His latest thing is he's discovered bubbles, and he cannot get enough bubbles. But his father has a company that produces, well, they don't make the balloons, but they make balloon bouquets. And, if you see that, you go to an event and you see the big balloon drops, his father has that kind of a company. So when he was 2, he had already figured out how to use the balloon machine that blows up balloons. And he would just go into the shop and blow up a balloon and carry it around. So watching him experience life, he's very tactile and he's very visual. And that compensates. And now he has had cochlear implants. So we talk about him wearing his ears, and people will look like, well, of course how do you wear your, but it's the implants that, and he can hear, but how does he hear? It's very different from the way a natural hearing person would hear. But he's now started to experiment with sounds.
Oh, how fun to see that.
Talking about communication, it's really, and he knows more sign language than I do. At 3, he knows more than I do. But even before he started learning ASL, he had no trouble communicating. And I think when I hear stories, and I've heard so many stories since I, started talking about my grandson who is deaf, people who have a deaf grandchild or a deaf child have been contacting me. And especially since the book came out, they've been contacting me. And it's sad to me how many people have said, I just don't know how to communicate with them.
Yeah, because they're still human. They still have those needs. And,
right.
And there's so many different ways to communicate. And what's your favorite way, if they don't know sign language and they can't speak and they're young, what's your favorite way to connect and communicate with them?
A smile. When he was little, when he was an infant, he was the happiest baby ever in the history of babies. I am certain of it because you could smile at him and he would just smile and his whole face just lights up. As he started moving around, he would point, and then you can tell definitely, well, he's interested in this. Let's bring this closer to him. And that's kind of the way it went. If you watch their eyes, where are they looking, and you can pretty much tell what they're doing. And it doesn't have to be a big elaborate, this is, whatever. It can just be sharing that experience. One of the things that happened, I don't think it was the last time I saw him at the time, one of the most recent times I've seen him, because he lives in a different state, so I don't get to see him often enough. But he could live with me 24/7 and I wouldn't get enough of him. It's just that kind of way. But anyway, one of the last times I saw him, he was sitting across the room from me and he was kind of looking and he was moving around, and then he'd smile and then he'd look away and then he'd smile, like he was trying to communicate and wasn't quite sure, what he was doing. He wanted to play. I know him well enough to know he wanted to play. So I threw my arms open and he came running and he jumped into my arms and we grabbed him and twirled around, and that's what he wanted. He wanted to play. And I think if you get past that they can't hear, get past the verbal thing, and just tune into your kid, tune into it. It's the same as traveling in other countries. You can pick out the friendliest people in any country. You just smile and you just make eye contact and you just engage with them. It's amazing what a smile can do. But it's very sad how many people don't realize that just because they can't hear you doesn't mean they don't want that inner reaction, because they do.
Right. And that reminds me that it was the same way with my oldest son before he was diagnosed with Asperger's, and he wasn't communicating very much. And I took him to the store and said, "Which ice cream do you want?" And he would point and he meowed at me because he knew how to make sounds. But
right.
What kind of cereal do you want? Meow. And which kind of ice cream do you want? Meow. And there are lots of universal ways, like you say, a smile. Oh my goodness, if we're greeted with a smile, it's just, I got a message from one of my neighbors the other day, and it was my birthday, so I was happy. I'm driving down the street, just, yay, happy day. And I get this message from her saying, "I just passed you on the street. All I see is your smile." And so you don't even know who you're smiling at sometimes. It's just to have a smile. And I think where sometimes these situations where someone is different and they probably get those reactions sometimes, like, "Oh, I don't know how to talk to you. I don't know how to deal with you." Or
right.
like in the case of my son, someone said he wouldn't talk to me if I tried. We just don't understand how to connect with them. And so we don't approach them. And if we do approach them, we don't approach them with a smile, because smiling is hard to do when you're nervous and you don't know what to do in that situation. And so I think that is a really fantastic step one. Practice smiling.
Yeah. I live in the country, and one of the things that struck me when I moved here from a very large metropolitan area, San Francisco Bay Area is huge and millions of people, and you don't even know the people that live next door, much less, down the street. And everyone out here on the road would wave and smile. And the real estate person who was showing us the area when I first came out here, she would just smile and wave, smile, wave, hi, hi. And I'm like, who is that? I don't know. But it's just a common practice out here. And after having lived here for a period of time, I finally asked someone, when I first came here, I was struck by how friendly everyone was. Even on the road, in their cars, not even in the store, they would just smile and wave and smile and wave. And he says, "I'll tell you why." I said, "Oh, I've got to hear this. This is awesome. Something has happened." My mind is going, there was a community event and they all decided to be happy. And no. He says, "They're afraid they might know you and they'll run into you later." You didn't. So it kind of lessened the effect, I think, for me. But, coming here from an area where you look at people's cars and they're grumpy, they're like,
Yeah.
And having people look like they're happy, it kind of really made me fall in love with the area. And then after living here and getting to know a lot of the people, very, very different kinds of people. Very different people live here. You wouldn't believe the different kinds of people live here from different parts of the world. And then to find out that they're not really friendly, they're just afraid you're going to tell them at church one day, "You didn't wave at me." That it was, I'd rather stick to my original interpretation that people are just really happy and friendly here.
Yeah, I have decided that I want to be happy and smile. I want to, it's kind of a crime check too. If somebody's walking down the street, like, hey, I saw you, and then maybe it will deter their less than pleasant activities if they're going out for trouble or something. But also like a neighborhood watch, that's the word I was looking for. But also it's just, hey, there's somebody, I don't know if I know you or not, but let's be friends. And there's not enough friendship in the world. So my kids and my husband asked me yesterday, he's like, who's that? I was like, I don't know. He's like, oh, okay, we just don't know them. That's fine. Everybody wave. But when my kids were littler, I was afraid of losing them. I was afraid one of them was going to sneak out the door and go wandering around the neighborhood or something. So when somebody new would move into the neighborhood, we had a couple houses down, was their best friend, and they moved. And so we had new people a couple of houses down. I thought, what if my kids think they're going to their friend's house and it's some stranger? So we went over and introduced ourselves. Hi, if you see any of my kids, this is where we belong. And my kids never did get out and do anything, but we made sure that we knew who was around. And I just carried that on, because why not be friends with the people if you can? I mean, we're not in San Francisco. We used to live in the Bay Area for a couple of years, and I was like, wow, that's a different kind of experience. But why not? Why not wave there too? They just think you're crazy. It's not friendly. It's crazy.
Look at that crazy person waving at everybody. Yeah. Yep. I have to apologize. My allergies are crazy this morning. Speaking of crazy, so if I'm doing this a lot, it's because my eyes are weeping and my sinuses are not happy. It's that time of year. I have seasonal allergies, and I've often said, what a horrible, horrible thing, what a horrible twist of fate to take someone who loves to be outside and who loves to garden as much as I do, and then give them allergies.
Well, that's one of my kids, I'm not going to dance and sing boy, Brendan, he's allergic to so many things. And we never thought that he had allergies because he's always got it. And I thought, well, some kids just have runny noses all the time. His speech therapist, though, one day is like, you probably want to check him for something. And so we took him into the doctor, and sure enough, he's allergic to all the things that start from January to February. And then there's another set of stuff that comes out. And then he's seasonal, all of the seasons.
Right. Well, because different plants do different things at different times of the year. I am the same way. Yeah.
So that's one of his things.
I have just learned to just live with it. And I know that in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, I'm going to have several good weeks in a row before it starts again. No, it's just the way it is.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that can make people different. There's all sorts of different things. And we can assume, like when my son was wearing his socks everywhere, people were worried that he was contagious or like scared. What is that? And we can do the same kind of reaction. And, it's just an allergy, but you're not contagious or dangerous to be around or anything. And I think the deaf community sometimes gets something similar, like more than I'm afraid and I don't know how to interact with you, but there's something wrong with you. And so many different ways that people are bullied and just is the word ostracized and pushed away. And we affect relationships with our fears and not knowing. So I love that you've got this book. Tell us a little more about the book and how it is going to have this compassion and all this wonderful things, how it's going to help kids interact better.
The whole idea initially was I was looking for a children's book for my grandson. And I couldn't find one that had a primary deaf character that was sort of the hero. And Laehli is our story's hero. It starts, she runs away into the jungle because she's being bullied in her village because she's different and they don't know how to relate to her. So she decides she's going to run away and she goes into the jungle. And really, in the children's book story, she wanders across a baby elephant stuck in the mud. Really, she kind of gets lost, and she finds this baby elephant, and she stays with the elephant. And she is a different kind of child being deaf, and he is a different kind of elephant, being a baby elephant that likes to wander away from mom. He's very independent. He likes to go on adventures by himself. He leaves the herd all the time. He's just very different kind of elephant. So here are these two different children, really, who find each other, and they become friends. Initially, it was to bring awareness that kids who just are deaf, they just can't hear. They're kids. They're just normal kids. Treat them like any other children, and they will be fine. It's also about acceptance, because while eventually, when she goes back to the village, the kids stop teasing her and stop bullying her. Eventually, she really finds her voice, even though she's deaf. And she stands up for the elephants, and she stands up for the jungle, and she stands up for other deaf kids. So it's about accepting people where they are and letting them be themselves and letting them feel their full power into who they are. And really, when my grandson was diagnosed, the first thing I said to my daughter was, we will never, ever, ever allow anyone to let him feel like there's anything wrong with him. That's what the story is about. It's to bring awareness to other kids, to other adults. I had a great grandmother call me the other day saying what a wonderful story it was. And she loved it so much she had to buy herself a book. So, nice. It's a children's book, but it's not necessarily for kids because it's about friendship and love and acceptance and wanting to make people care enough about those who are different, to get to know them. Just because someone is different doesn't mean they can't be your best friend in the whole world. It's really, I was that kid who always stood up to the bullies. I was that kid who got in fights at school because other kids were picking on, I had a friend in a wheelchair, and they would pick on her mercilessly. And it's a good thing that I went to school when I did, because I probably would have been expelled for fighting on the playground, because I couldn't handle it. It's, why are you picking on this person who is, talk to her. She's, but that was something that I grew up with. And I have a cousin who I was very close in age and very close to growing up. And people would pick on him because he was different. He was on the autism spectrum, and Asperger's is probably what it was. But we back then it was just, he's a weird kid, Yeah. And I would get in fights defending him, and it happened to the point where one of my teachers finally said, "Okay, we're changing our recess time." And I could not. We were in different classrooms and made it I would be out there at the same time. But that's what it is. It's part of the anti-bullying thing, but it's really let's love everybody. Let's take care of everybody. Let's see people as people, not as, oh, that person is different, or this person is weird, or that person has something wrong with them. And that's ultimately what it is. I tell people it's ultimately a love story. It's a love story between Laehli and her elephant friends. It's a love story between her mother and her. It's a love story between her and her eventual friends that she makes as she grows. And when I was doing another interview, someone pointed out it's also a love story between a grandmother and her grandson. And it is very much that, even though Laehli is a little girl and my grandson lives many, many miles away from the nearest elephant. So that's, that's what it is at its core. I hope people take away that message that we need to really look at each other with love and look at our similarities rather than our differences. The world would be a much better place.
Yes. And sometimes, I say all the time, if we have a weakness or something that's different, like you said, he's very visual. he's got extra strength in something else to compensate for what he lacks. And I find that true in every sense of every person I've ever met or come across. And some of the things that you're talking about reminds me of my son as well. My Stephen, my Asperger's boy, when he was in 3rd grade, one of his teachers came to me and she was so excited. And I was like, why are you so excited? She's so excited because she found this news article about somebody who had Asperger's and they had done something awesome. I was like,
Right.
Okay. And she said, there's hope. He can do stuff. I was like, of course he can. Why wouldn't he? What are you talking about? But we never told him that there was anything wrong with him.
Right.
And like you were saying, just nothing is going to hold him back. He didn't even know what Asperger's or autism was until he was like 13 or 14 years old. And then he was like, oh, but I have Asperger's. So that means da, 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 da. And we took 2 or 3 days ago, what is going on with you? What is wrong? Why are you not doing stuff? Because I have Asperger's. I can't do stuff. I'm like, you've always had it. Just because you know what it's called now doesn't make any difference. And he was like, oh, right. And he just snapped right out of it and was like, back to his awesome self. And we have these differences, and they're just strengths in disguise. They're strengths. And when we can decide that we need each other's differences to build upon and to strengthen us, I'm so excited for the day when everyone can realize that your strengths, when someone else calls it a weakness, can change the world,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And because I have family members who are on the spectrum as well, I've kind of studied that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the most brilliant minds, the most brilliant scientists, the most brilliant researchers, they're all on the spectrum somewhere. And I think if you go far enough, I called my cousin is a rocket scientist now.
For real.
I think if you look at what is different about strengths as a strength, like you just said, I call that the mathematics gene. That's the mathematics. That's the brilliance gene. And if you look at how many scientists are somewhere on the spectrum, that's it. They're brilliant. They're just too smart for us commoners. And that's kind of the way I look at people that are somewhere on the autism spectrum, is they're just brilliant. They're just in a different way. They have a different way of expressing their brilliance. But it's like the other day I saw on social media a video story about a young girl who was born with no arms.
Mm-hmm.
And she does everything with her feet. And she is just as gifted and just as talented with her drawing and her penmanship as they showed videos. I'm like, I don't write that well. And it's just, she has taken what makes her different and put a little bit of oomph on it, her special flavor. It's her special spice to life. And I think that's what we all do, whether we have something that the general population views as being different or not. If you look deep enough, you're going to find something different about every single person. Some people just have them more on the outside. They're like waving their difference flag, going, I'm different, I'm over here I am. I'm being different. And I think that's just a different kind of brilliance. And if we didn't have these people who are so unabashedly different, I have no arms, so what? We would be missing something as humanity. We need that. We need that. We need all kinds of people and all kinds of animals. And I grew up thinking that animals were just a different form of person. They were always people to me. So that's the other thing I want to bring across with the Laehli books, is looking at animals in a different way. Animals have personalities too. I once had a 3-legged goat. The goat didn't know it had 3 legs. All the other goats. And I think somehow as humanity, we've developed this, everything must have a label.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of the problem with the world. What is this disabled term?
Right.
They're not disabled. You know, they're differently abled. I'm not even sure I like that anymore because everyone is differently abled. But I think we put people, like I just said, on the spectrum, or we give people labels for things. And how much better would the world be if we just said, oh, that's just another person, rather than that's a differently abled person.
Well, my youngest son is so similar to my oldest. Well, he's not my youngest. My non-dancing boy. I guess I should call him something. I haven't asked his permission to share, so I don't want to say which kid he is. But anyway, he is so similar to my oldest boy. We've known that he's on the spectrum as well. They just mirror everything. But because of the experiences Stephen had being labeled, we haven't had my other boy diagnosed at all. So like, we kind of know what to do. We'll just do it. And their school experience in particular has been so drastically different because he has not been labeled. And it's just amazing what the difference of a label or not having a label. And like I said, when Stephen found out that he had a label, he tried to become that label for a couple of days. We're like, we do that to ourselves too. And I was like, oh, my husband for a long time, I've been really good at not saying it, so it hasn't come up a lot. But I would say, oh, I'm fat today or something like that. He's like, you are not allowed to say the F word. And so I've been pretty good at not saying that F word. And it changes the way I feel. I never knew that I was overweight before. Oh my goodness. This is a funny story. When we moved away, we lived in California for a while, right? So my mom came out and visited, my dad and everybody came and visited. And then, I don't know, a year or so later, I was going through some stuff with my mom at her house, and I found this picture of her at the beach with somebody. I was like, who is this? I don't recognize this person. Who is this? She goes, that's you. I was like, no way! No way! There's like 3 sizes as big as I am. And she's like, honey, that's you. And I felt so different after that, walking away. We're going, oh, and I had to go through this process of, and it's kind of funny to say that I wondered why my husband would stay with me because I was so fat, and all these different things. And they're like, well, you know what? I was like this before we got married. And I'm not really that fat. I mean, I'm bigger than I should be, but I'm not ginormous and scary. And, but I went through kind of a depression, find myself process because I had a label. And so labels. Oh my goodness. I know you coach people. And do you have a tip on, there's 2 things I want to maybe address now. How do you deal with someone that has a label, and how can you help them work through that? Like my husband was like, you're not allowed to say the F word. That's one thing that he did for me. And then also, what if you're on the other end? What would you suggest to people who find themselves labeled?
You know, first off, I want to say I have almost the same experience that you have had with the picture. We were on vacation and looking at pictures later. I went, who is that really big woman in the same shirt that I had on? And I think every woman has had that experience. And I can just laugh at yourself and say, you know. Yeah. But labels, I think, you know, there's occasionally you see this thing on social media, what would you rid the world of if you could rid the world of anything? And I always say labels. And people always say, why? That's a strange thing. No, it's everything. You know, it's from, I happen to be impacted by a couple of different autoimmune diseases. For a very long time, I would tell people I have RA and I have lupus. And finally, it clicked in my head. No, I am impacted by RA and I am impacted by lupus. I'm not claiming ownership of these things. And I think that's the first step, is realizing that if you are the parent of a child who has been diagnosed with quote unquote special needs, the first thing you have to realize is this child has exactly the same potential as any other child. You know, for a very long time, I worked in a group home for developmentally delayed adults. And I can tell you, the people who were told their whole lives they could do anything they wanted to do were in a lot better shape physically and mentally when they reached middle age and were in a group home than those people who were told, oh, you're disabled. It's okay, you're disabled. Because they started labeling themselves, I can't do, you know, and a lot of times they do that. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I spent a lot of my time reversing that. I had one client that I worked with a lot. I probably worked with her more than any other client. And her thing, she is someone who has Down syndrome. Now, I have watched a young actor named Connor Long, who has Down syndrome, be a newscaster on TV and win an Emmy and all these wonderful things. And here is this other person, his age, who is very different. And it took me 1.5 years, but we started making breakthroughs where she started progressing when she learned to write her name. She was an adult, didn't know how to write her name. She'd been told her whole life she couldn't do it.
Wow.
And I think a lot of that falls on a parent, and there's so much online that you can find out about parenting a child who is different than whatever normal is. I don't think there is a normal anymore.
Well, I think just different than what we expect.
Right. And, you know, with my daughter and my grandson, her first reaction to him being deaf was, oh no, what are we going to do? And she waited a very long time to start her family. You know, she wasn't in her 20s when he was born. And a part of her said, did I wait too long? Is it my fault that he's deaf? And it took a while for her to come to terms with, and I think it was about when he started climbing out of his crib, and, you know, he pulls one chair up to get on the counter and then tries to lift another chair on the counter so that he can crawl into the cookies. There's nothing wrong with this child. There's nothing wrong with this child. But I think sometimes as parents, we have these expectations of what our children are going to be like. I know I did with my daughter. I had it down to blonde hair and blue eyes, and I wanted her to look just like me. And you know what? She looks nothing like me. And people who meet her don't realize she's my daughter because we're that different. But I've never been disappointed in that. That's a silly thing. This is my child. Of course, I love my child. And I think that's the first thing, if you are parenting a child who is different, however different they are, is to realize this is your child. They are perfect. They are exactly like God wanted them to be, and you are exactly the person that God wanted to have this child. So get over everything else and realize.
I think that you said something really amazing right there too, that God intended this perfect child to come to you as the perfect parent. I think we skip over that. We look for why. Is it my fault? We're looking for blame or some sort of reason instead of, oh, okay, this is what we got. And I didn't do that very much with my quadruplets. I really could, but I didn't have time to because they were coming. So I thought about it for maybe one day. I was like, oh, what's happening? Why? And then forget the why. We got to do something about this. They're coming. Let's get some extra diapers and some help in here. But that blame versus acceptance is a really important step as well.
It is.
And to remember, if you were given this kind of challenge, whatever kind of challenge it is, if you're given something, there's a reason, and it's usually because you can do it.
Right. Yeah, it's absolutely. And if you're on the other side where you've been labeled, like I said, I've seen what happens to people who are told you can do anything versus you can do nothing. And you have to realize you can do anything that you want. Years and years ago, we were in a very different world. And I think probably a lot of people today that are adults don't even realize there was ever a time where children were born into families, and if the children didn't live up to their expectation, they were just sent away to some kind of school or home, or, you know, there were institutions that raised many, many, many kids who were deemed different. Right. When I was very young, I had an older stepbrother who was Fragile X syndrome, which is a form of mental retardation. And even though I hate that word and I hate that term, he was severely handicapped. And I was very, very little. I was probably 4. And I remember one day I had an older brother, and the next day he was gone. I'm like, wait a minute, where'd he go? What happened? And we would go and visit him. And I was told he was at school. Well, they had put him into one of these homes. And that had such a huge impact on my 4-year-old brain that I never got over it. And I think that's why I grew up taking care of being the protector of differently abled kids when I went to school, because it never left me that this was a person that humanity kind of failed. You know, and I'm glad that most of those institutions are gone, and, you know, we've made leaps and bounds. But I think today, having a child who is different is just like, okay, you go online, you find a support group, what worked for you, what do you know? And we are better at that. We are better at that. There's still ways to go, but we are better than we used to be. So I always try to encourage people, you know, look where we've come from. You know, you can do this. You know, whatever it is, you can do this. You have people around you who can form a support group. If you don't have a support group, find a support group. There are tons of them all over social media. Whether you are the one who has been declared special needs. I spoke to a wonderful, wonderful person. I actually did a show recently with a person who grew up in special needs classes. There is no reason for him to ever be. This is a brilliant person. I feel like the school system failed this person. And I think a lot of minds are open these days to where it's like you're on the spectrum. Okay. You know, everybody knows somebody that's on the spectrum. You know, and I feel that way with my grandson. When the first 2 friends that I told, well, we've got our diagnosis and he is deaf. And they went, oh, my sister has a deaf. You know, it's like everybody I talked to knew somebody who was deaf. And I think support's out there. If you want the support, the support's out there. So whether you are raising a child who is on the autism spectrum, or you have a deaf child, or you have some other thing going on in your family, you can do it. You know, you wouldn't have this child in your family. I believe everything is by design.
Yes.
And you have to just do it. Just go with it.
Yeah. When my oldest was diagnosed with Asperger's, I was not devastated by it. I was so excited. I was like, yes, it's not my fault. Woo! And they're like, are you okay? Can we set you up with some counseling or something to help you deal with this? I'm like, no, it's not my fault. Woo! There's a reason. Okay, now we can go.
Right.
But I think sometimes we think we're the only ones.
Right.
And we're simply not the only ones. I didn't know anybody who had quadruplets before, but lo and behold, while I'm on bed rest, growing my babies, my neighbor down the street watches a thing on the news, and there's a quadruplets. Everybody who has quadruplets in Utah, come gather to this party. And ta-da, I met all the people who had quads, and there's not a whole lot of them in Utah, but there's not just me. Right. And you were talking about the girl who was really talented with her toes and no arms. Yep. You think that maybe that's not very common, but I know someone. I grew up with a girl. She had arms, but they weren't usable. And so she would, in class, she would take her shoes off and write on the floor with her feet. Yep. And no matter what it is, you are not the only one.
Right.
I think that's really amazing to remember we're not the only ones. And we are drawing near to the end of our time. I remind everyone that I'm Lydia Taggart with Layers of Communication. You can find us on YouTube at Lydia Taggart and also lydiataggart.com. We've got a Parents Play Shop coming up in August is the next one. I'm super excited. We can sign up for that. Comment. Let us know that you've watched this on the replay, or if you have any questions, let us know. We'd love to address them. If you have future topics that you want us to discuss, let us know about that too. And Kellie, where can they find you and know more about your book? I'm assuming it's on Amazon, right?
It is on Amazon. Book 1 and Book 2 are both on Amazon right now. You can find more than you would ever want to know about this project, including some great videos on American Sign Language at www.laehli.com, and Laehli is Laehli. You can also find me through there. You can contact me through that website. That's kind of where we're directing everybody to right now. We just started an Indiegogo campaign to turn the book series into a movie, and we would appreciate you checking that out as well.
I'm so excited. And you've got so many other books. This is not your first book. This is just one in your whole big giant collection. So much value and worth to look up Kellie Fitzgerald and the Laehli Project. Thank you for being with us, Kellie. Is there anything else that you want to say as a last minute? Don't forget something.
No, thank you so much for having me on. I could talk to you all day about your quads. I am just intrigued by multiples in general, and it's just exciting for me. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and listening. Share this out, subscribe, like, and remember, you are worth it, and so are they. Have a magical day. Love ya. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Layers of Communication with your host, Lydia Taggart. Tune in next week as we discover the layers in order to communicate and connect down to your core on Lydia Taggart's Layers of Communication.